In this video, you'll create your first animation in Cavalry. We'll build it step by step using the basic shape, and you'll learn how shapes and keyframing works so you can use it in your own animations. This is episode 4 of my beginner series, but you can start here as well. Let's start off by holding Alt and clicking this button to add our rectangle. Then let's change the frame rate to 60, and lastly, let's change the color of the rectangle shape here. And before we can move on to animating, let's go ahead and change the corner radius to something like 50 for this rectangle. And now we have the basic shape set up for this animation. And if you look here, we have these two size variables, and we want to animate these for the animation. So let's move the playhead to frame 30, and then we can click this little button right here, which is going to add a keyframe. And then we'll see these two parameters in the layers panel as well as the keyframe panel, and we can now go ahead and change the playhead to move it along the timeline. Let's try and set it to something like frame 90, and here we can set our sort of second state for the animation. Then we can hold Alt and then drag on one of these values to change both, and it will automatically add a keyframe. Let's set it to around 600. And now we have our first movement. And what we're doing here is essentially changing the attributes, but these vary from the different shapes using. But for this one, we're going to only stick to the basic rectangle for this animation. And now we can move on to the next keyframe, which is going to be at 130, where we can change the height. And let's set it to half the height that it was originally at, which was 600. And for the width, let's just keep that as is right now. You can add a keyframe, but it's not necessary. And at this point in the animation, we want some rotation to begin. So let's go ahead and look in the attribute panel for the rotation value here. And let's go ahead and just set a keyframe at 0. And now we'll see a keyframe, but we'll wait until a little later to change it. Then let's move to 160, and at this point we want some new movement to begin, so let's add a keyframe at the height here, and we also want the width to have a new change in the width, so let's add a keyframe there. And you'll see these dotted lines, which means that nothing happens in between these two and the values are the same between those keyframes. So let's move the playhead along at around 185. We might want to have the size be the same as the original, which was 200 by 200. So now you'll see that they both move back to the original, so they go up and then it flattens and goes back like this animation here. But we still want to have a rotation. So let's go ahead and see where we have the end keyframe. And this would be a little later, so let's set it at 210, where we can then rotate the whole animation using this rotation value. And 2 times around would be quite appropriate for this animation. You can also hit 360 and then times 2, and then just hit enter. And now we've sort of plotted out the basic movement. And if you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to subscribe. But this animation doesn't really look interesting, and that's because we had to add some easing to it. So let's select all keyframes by dragging over them, then go into the graph editor. Here you can scroll in and out using the scroll wheel and hold shift to make it go vertically and then horizontally with Alt. And clicking the mouse wheel you can navigate. Now you'll see that all the lines are completely straight, and that's why the animation is very linear and not very interesting. To change that, we can highlight some of these keyframes, then right click and hit key interpolation and then select the Bezier one. Then we can, while holding shift, drag on these handles to make this curve, and this is gonna create a more natural movement like in the real world. And now we basically have the first movement done, and we can move on to the second part. And you can see this one doesn't really have this S-curve that we want. So let's go ahead and select the keyframe here on the right, and we'll go ahead and right click on that to make it the Bezier one as well. Then we can go ahead and select that keyframe on the right, and we can again hold shift and we'll drag it out a bit like this. Now it is a little large on the top here. As you can see, the handles are very dragged out. the reason is that if you try to change them, it also changes the one on the left. To change that, we can right click on this and then hit unlock Bezier weight. And now they're sort of separate, so we can change the one on the right instead of both. And now that we have something we like, we can see it looks quite nice actually. And this is something you can change around with until you're happy with it. Now, before moving on, let's just go ahead and select all of the keyframes and just make them all the Bezier key interpolation, since we are going to use that one for this animation. Now, before adjusting the easing on the rotation, let's take a look at the size first. So we can select those 4 keyframes, and let's drag on the right side here to make it this S curve that we want. And I think that it looks alright now, but let's also take the left ones here and make them a little smaller so it sort of eases out more than it eases in. And now we have this, and we can move on to the rotation, which is this blue line we have here. So let's go ahead and select those keyframes by clicking one and then holding Control while clicking the other one as well. And then we can go ahead and hold Shift while dragging on one of the handles to get quite a strong S curve like this. And we'll see we have this middle where it's going to be the fastest, and we sort of want this to match the shape size as well, because that's going to look the nicest. I think I want the top handle here to be dragged out a little less, but this is honestly something you just have to experiment with until you're happy with it. Now, before adding an image to this shape, let's go ahead and add some motion blur on the rectangle shape, as well as enabling it here on this button right here. And you'll also see in the composition settings you can change the shutter angle to increase the motion blur by increasing the shutter angle. And now we have this result, but we want to add an image to it. So before doing that, I just realized I kind of want to adjust this one a bit more, but this is something you just have to go back and forth until you're sort of happy with it. Then go into the Fill tab of the rectangle and add a shader called the Image Shader. Then we can select that, and we need to drag in our image. I have my logo here, which is transparent, so let's go ahead and add some color to the background by dragging it onto the rectangle. And now you can see it's a little large, so I'm gonna go ahead and hold Alt and then change the scale, but you'll see it looks all weird now if you zoom in here. And that's because the tiling is not right. So let's select the tiling that's called decal, which looks quite cool in this image. And we can select that for both. And that's your first animation in Cavalry. Now, you can try watching this video next. And if you want, you can support the channel in the link below. Thanks for watching.